Hi guys, welcome to part 2 of our Q&A where I answer your questions that you sent me. So today's questions are all focusing on my daily work with the birds and the birds themselves. And through this video you will hear some strange little squeaky noises. You can probably hear them now. If you're wondering what that noise is, it's my little owl. I will do a video on this chap. He's called Hiccup and I bred him about 2 years ago. He's a fantastic little owl to fly. A little owl. But as you can hear now, he's chattering away, so I'm aware that some of that noise may have been picked up during the questions. So if you're wondering what the background noise is, I'm sorry if I can't get rid of it on the video, but it's this naughty little fella and his name is Hiccup. You noisy? I'm curious about your relationships between the birds and how the training process works. How do you go about getting the birds to be able to do what they can do? So when we start with a new untrained bird, they don't know what the benefit is of hanging around with the person. Now if it's a bird that's been hand reared, it will learn as it grows what's safe, what isn't, and we can introduce them to lots of different things. So when we work with owl species, we always tend to hand rear because they find it much easier to sort of process the environment from a younger age. When we work with falcons and hawks and eagles, we generally work with parent reared birds, so naturally reared birds, although sometimes they can be hand reared. And those birds have basically at the start of their life, all they've ever seen is their clutch siblings and their parents in an enclosed aviary. So we basically take them as a full grown teenager, basically at the time when they're ready to leave the nest anyway. The parents would want to kick them out. And then over the first few weeks, every moment that we spend with those birds, we tend to have food as well. So initially, the first lesson we're trying to teach them is that if you hang out with us, you're going to get food. And that's the one thing that they're looking for. After that point, as they start to connect the falconer to food, that's when the trust starts to develop, because by spending time with the falconer, they realise that, for instance, every time I move my hand around or I sneeze or I brush my hair out of the way, those actions aren't anything that they should be scared of. And we call this like the manning process. So basically it's where the bird gets used to man and everything around them, their environment. So as you spend time, they get used to sitting on your glove, they get used to eating off your glove, and it's basically small building steps. So when you tick those off, you'll start to take the bird for small walks, so you can start to introduce them to vehicles and fields and all those different things that they're going to see when you're out flying them. And each time you progress, you're sort of ticking a box off about the things that they've achieved. As that develops, you then start to ask the bird to jump a small distance, which might be, this far away from a perch to your hand for that bit of food that's on your hand. And then you increase the distance. When we start the training, we start them on a line, which we call a créance, which is just what we call a training line, really. And that's so that we can check that we've got the reaction that we want, that basically the bird is motivated enough to actually want to fly to us. When we get to a point where they've achieved a certain distance and we know that recall's really good, then we can let them fly free. And we just repeat the exact steps of just calling them to the glove or flying them to a lure, which is basically something they learn to catch. And then as each part of those bits develop, we can push them to do better and better things. So we can take them out into a big open field, we can start to fly them from the trees. So the first time a bird goes and sits in a tree, he's been used to working at maybe sort of 10, 12 feet from me, and then suddenly he's 40 foot up in a tree, and suddenly he's got the whole world below him, and he has to sort of work out what everything is. And again, he'll find me, which is really the anchor. It's the only thing he knows in that environment. And then we'll encourage him to fly up the tree. And you just build and build and build. So what starts as very simply asking them to come, just a couple of feet to you, becomes long, big distances, and then you can start to introduce them to the idea of quarry, to the idea of prey. Like for instance, when you hit a bush, a pheasant might fly out, and then obviously their natural instincts kick in, and that's when they think, oh, the falconer hit the bush, out flew the pheasant, I've got a chance to chase it. So you start to build on each of those things that they learn, time by time. For some birds it can happen very quick and over a couple of weeks, and some birds it takes a little bit longer. So depending on the species and the history of that bird, whether it's been previously worked with or whether it's a totally untrained bird, we can build on getting that bird to free flight and then to start hunting. And again, when we're teaching the bird to hunt, we teach them that the falconer is part of that process. So whether it's the fact that my dog goes on point to indicate that something's there, or whether it's my actions that create some prey, we're teaching the falcon or the hawk that we're part of that team. So it's based on food, but not food alone. It's a sort of a steady building block process of basically allowing the bird to get used to you, and then to develop those skills step by step. Are there differences in behaviour based on gender, such as habits, aggressiveness, more social behaviours, one hunts better than the other, etc.? Yeah, we do find differences in gender. The females of birds of prey species are always around a third larger, sometimes a half larger than the male. So the first difference you've got is size and weight, and therefore power. So the larger the bird, the more power they've got, but the slower they're going to fly generally. The smaller the bird, they've got much more agility, but they're not going to be able to take on such big prey. So you're trading off aggression for agility. So it all depends on what you're looking at to hunt with that bird. That will affect your choice as to whether you go male or female. So the females tend to have more aggression and more power, but they tend to be not as fast as the male of the same species. The other issues we've got with gender is hormones. So we tend to find that the males have quite an even temperament. So if they are always quite mellow, their temperament will generally stay the same. They'll get a little bit more hormonal in the spring, but most of the time they're very predictable. If they're grumpy, they're always grumpy. So the males we find are very predictable. They always tend to think with their stomachs. The females are a lot more hormonal, and that's not just within the breeding season, although that's definitely way worse. When they get hormonal in breeding season, you might as well have a different bird to handle altogether. But the females, you could pick your female hawk up to fly, and some days she's good as gold, and other days you just think, you know what, today's not worth it. So if you get a female bird of prey, you'll find that the hormones will go up and down a lot more, and you're going to have to deal with those mood swings, a little bit like dealing with a teenager, whereas the males, generally overall, their personalities tend to stay a lot more mellow. Other than that, their ability to hunt, their ability to be trained, they don't actually differ really. If you've got the basic falconry skills to be able to train that bird, whether you choose a male or a female shouldn't matter that much, but your expectations of that bird should be limited to what that bird is able to do. So there's no point taking a small hawk, like a small male Harris, and expecting him to catch a hare. The prey's way oversized for his level of safe hunting. So it's important that the falconer chooses the right bird for the right job. What kind of stuff do you feed the raptors? Where does the food come from? So we feed them a whole range of food. We try and match the food to what they would naturally eat in the wild. Now that might not be species specific, because we might be dealing with a bird that eats prey that I don't physically have access to. However, nutritionally we match it up. So all the food I tend to buy in, well, most of the food is pre-frozen food, which is literally delivered by a food processor that deals with zoo food and bird of prey food, things like that. So I can literally order chicken, quail, rodents, mice and rats, anything really that I need to get for them. But I also have a percentage of wild food, which is what they hunt in the winter. So they will eat a portion of that, and anything they can't manage goes in the freezer and then goes back to them when they're able to eat it. For instance, if a hawk catches a rabbit or a hare, it's a huge amount of meat, and they will eat so much and fill up with their crop, and then the rest of it I will offer them a little bit of food, so they'll come off their prey. I can put the rest of my bag, take it home, divide it all down, put it in the freezer, and then the birds get it on another day, because they physically can't eat an entire animal a lot of the time. How do you have different species coexist in the same artificial environment? So it's a really good question, this. Obviously you'll have seen some video footage where I have multiple birds sat out on the lawn in the sunshine, basically enjoying the weather, and yet they're all top predators, they're close together. Some of them wouldn't naturally see each other in the wild. The important thing is they don't mix. So I've had a lot of questions in the past where people go, isn't this bird lonely on its own? Should it be paired with other birds? But you have to remember with birds of prey is that they spend most of their life on their own. So actually, if I was to put two goshawks together out of breeding season, there's a good chance they're not going to get on, because in the wild those birds would spend most of their life alone. So as humans, we tend to put loneliness onto animals, and some of those animals live alone in the wild. So loneliness is just not an emotion that they experience. I tend to work it with my birds so that through a year they fly for a large percentage of the year, and then they have a rest period, which is really what we call the molt, and that's the same as in the wild. The birds need a chance to basically regrow all their feathers. So when they're not being flown and hunted, and it's important to note that there is a hunting season, so I can't physically hunt the bird year round unless it's pest species. So for certain species that I might want my bird to hunt, there'll be a season. So a lot of our hunting season in the UK is around September or October, depending on the species, through till about February. So we can hunt and fly them through that winter period. And then into the spring, they can then go into a breeding program if they want to breed, and then they can have a bit of a rest to basically regrow their feathers. So they molt their feathers out every year, so any feathers that are damaged get regrown so that they can keep flying. If they break tail feathers or primary wing feathers, that's going to limit their ability to fly. And that's what they do in the wild. However, they have a bit of a luxury in captivity because I can put a bird into an aviary, give it personal space and freedom to do what it wants, which is mainly just eat lots of food, and all that excess energy goes into regrowing a lovely new set of feathers. In the wild, they're still having to hunt and fly and keep warm in the cold, so their molt tends to take longer. It's why you find the odd feather on the ground. It's because it'll be a feather that's molted, and they basically go through a process where they drop 2 feathers, so 1 on each wing, and then when those are half grown, the next 2 will drop. So they don't end up like a bald chicken. They sort of steadily grow feathers by feathers. So basically I can put them all through rotation where I fly them and they get a bit of a break to breed or to molt. And each of those birds has their own aviary. So although they're physically near each other, they're not mixing. If I put all my birds into one aviary, I would end up with a couple of very fat and happy birds, and not a lot of anything else. Basically, any bigger raptor will go and attack any smaller raptor because it's just nature. They don't get on, they're not friends. However, I do know if I bring a new bird into the area, some of my falcons will shout an alarm call and basically say, that bird's new, we don't know that one. So they definitely tolerate each other and they know each other, but I don't free fly them together because it would just end in disaster. What part of your job do you find most rewarding? So the most rewarding part of my job is being able to see happy, healthy raptors that are in good plumage, that are fit, they're in good condition, and when I fly them, they come back to me, because that is the ultimate way that they're saying, we approve of what you're doing. When you free fly that bird, especially for the first time, it has 2 options, stay or leave. I cannot do anything when I free fly a bird to make it stay. I cannot condition that bird to a point where it doesn't think it has another option. That bird actively has to make a choice. Is it worth me staying with this falconer, or is it worth me going off over here and doing something on my own? And if I've done everything that builds up to that point correctly, then that bird should be able to understand that staying with me is by far the best option. And it is rewarding. Every day that I free fly a bird and it comes back to me, affirms what I'm doing, that it's good, their behaviour is reward to me. My personal reward about actually being able to work with these birds every day is just to be able to see into their world, and that is massively rewarding. But what overtakes that is the way they react to me, the fact that they accept me around them, that they're happy to be handled, that when they fly, they want to come back. That to me is just worth every miserable moment, every rubbish day in the pouring rain cleaning aviaries. All those horrible moments make up for that one magical moment where you successfully hunt with your bird, because it shows that you've actually managed to achieve really the ultimate goal with a bird of prey, which is to get it to hunt. Or, you know, if you're just free flying a bird, the fact that they choose to fly around in the open, enjoy themselves, and then come back. So one of my highest flying birds is Duke, my little Lana falcon. There's a video from about 6 years ago about when I first got him, and I'm going to make another video on him soon. you know, he's hit around 2,500 feet. And I know that because I put a little altimeter on him. It's tiny and he weighs about 5 grams. And when I get him back down, I can have a look at the number and the readout on there. And for him to go up that high, so I can't see him, you know, a few hundred feet, I've struggled to see him. But him to go up there, spend 20, 30 minutes, sometimes an hour up there, and then to go, yeah, I've had my fun, I'm going to come down for some food. And to choose to come back to me from that sort of distance, I find just incredible. What is the most difficult part of being a falconer? Probably the biggest part is keeping on going no matter what, because there's no holidays, there's no let-ups. I can't have a lie-in because it's Sunday and I feel like it. You know, these birds need feeding, they need cleaning, they need flying every single day that it's possible to do so. So unless the weather is super torrential rain or high winds, those guys need to be flown, and it's my duty to do that. And there are days when you're tired, when you're ill, where you're just not in the mood. So to make yourself get up and do those things is really hard sometimes. It's probably one of those things that, you know, you just have to channel through. It's just one of those things that it happens to all of us, but they are my top priority, so they have to come first. And if they don't, there's no point having them. What part of being a falconer were you most unprepared for? I think the thing that caught me out the most is the emotional side. And you know, you spend months and years reading through books and you learn all the actual technical processes of how to look after them, all the husbandry, the flying, the training, but no one really warns you of the emotional side. And it's odd because we're working with animals that they don't love us. I would say, you know, your cat or your dog loves you. They tolerate us, but they tolerate us for a good reason. What they do build is trust, and I find that trust bond stronger than love, to be honest. The whole emotional roller coaster of up and downs between the day where your bird has an amazing flight, they fly from hundreds of feet, they catch the prey, they're happy, you're happy for them, and then those days where things go really wrong, they're just miles apart, and you're constantly chasing the high, and the highs don't come as often as the lows. You know, many days can be frustrating, training's not going to plan, the bird almost takes backward steps. You know, it can be a bit of a tango, and that can be a real challenge. What is your favourite species to fly? I think they all have their benefits, and it's very hard within all my birds to have a favourite, a single favourite. It's like having a favourite child. I always joke, to be honest, it's the ones that are behaving that day are my favourites. However, there is something about falcons, especially peregrines, that is just magic. I think it's the way that they fly, it's the way they are in terms of their personality and their character. They've just got the best of everything. You know, they've got the looks, they've got the personality, they've got the speed and the agility when they fly. Watching a falcon stoop out of the sky is just incredible. And even when you're lure flying a bird, so swinging a lure for them to chase, which we use in training, there's a sort of a strange connection with that bird that you have, and the whole world just falls away, and the only thing that I focus on is that bird, and they are just magic. And until you see that happen in front of you, even on a TV, it's just not the same. But to work with those sort of birds that are awesome predators that fly at incredible speeds, you know, you're talking with a peregrine, they dive at over 200 miles an hour, they're the fastest animal on the planet. There's something very, very magical and very intense about working with those birds. How many birds do you take care of in total, and how long does it take you to take care of them on a daily basis? So I have just under 40 birds altogether. Yep, that's right, 40. A normal process in the morning is to go around, check the aviary birds. Some of those birds have 2 feeds a day, so they get fed in the morning. I then take any birds that are in their indoor overnight quarters outside, and we put them onto what we call the weathering area. So basically it's where their perches are, and it allows them to have a bit of a sunbathe, to have a bath, you know, to soak up the weather and to get some fresh air. So they stay out for the day. When I've got all the birds in the right places, I then go around and I clean. So all the perches have to be cleaned. Wherever they've pooped underneath, I usually use sand or gravel that has to be washed down. Any sort of pellets need to be removed. I then have to go around all the aviaries and do the same, and any baths almost every day need to be refilled, especially in the summer because you get algae growth, so you've got to fill those every day or every other day. And by the time I've done that, I'm probably at lunchtime, and then I'll spend the afternoon flying through the birds that are free flying. So it will take me, if I work super fast, it take me about 8 hours, but to be honest, it's usually a lot more. In the summer, you know, at the minute we've got much more daylight hours, so that process is stretched out, which in some ways is good because I've got a bit more time to do stuff. But on the flip side, I've also got a breeding project going. So at the moment in the incubator, I've got little owl eggs, tawny eggs, and I've got some falcons as well. So I'm now dealing with incubation and eggs, and then those chicks need to go back to the parents when they hatch. And then I've got to keep an eye on the parents to make sure they look after their chicks correctly. And so all the breeding side of things, which I'll go to, or I'll explain in another video, that's all on top of my normal workload. Obviously you've got food prep before you fly each bird, and I weigh all the birds each day, so it's one of the ways that we manage our birds. It's a good quick indicator of, you know, how much food they need, how healthy they are. So each bird needs to be weighed before it's flown, then it needs to be flown, and then at the end of the day all the birds out on the weathering area need to be put back in overnight so that they don't get eaten by foxes or anything like that. You know, we want to leave them out, a bit like with your chickens, you put them away at night. So by the time I sit down at the end of the day, I'm knackered. And I go to bed and I have to get up and do it all over again. So if there's daylight hours, there's work to be done. Are you doing falconry alone, or do you have someone beside you to help with the training and feeding? So yeah, it's largely me alone, and for most of my career I've largely been alone. However, I do often have volunteers, and for the last 3 years at my current location I'm at, I've actually had an amazing volunteer called Simon, and Simon's an absolute legend. He comes every single week, and between us, for him, obviously he loves being around the birds, so we tend to do a deep clean once a week. I do a little clean every day, and then we do a deep clean once a week. And then in return for his help with the husbandry side, I've been teaching him how to be a falconer. So he gets time with the birds, he's learning how to fly them, how to handle them, and then on the flip side he helps me with the majority of the work, which everyone forgets. Anything with animals, people think, wow, I'd love to ride a horse or fly a bird. Most of it's husbandry, which is mostly cleaning. So if you're not prepared to get your hands dirty and prep food, which in this case is a lot of raw meat and dead animals, and clean up all the poo that they make, which again is a hell of a lot, then really, you know, there's no point getting started in something. But yeah, my volunteers are an absolute godsend. But a lot of my time, you know, over the last sort of 12 years or so, I've been doing it pretty much single-handedly, which is very, very tiring. Do you have a connection with those birds we haven't seen yet, or are you only fond of your favourites and the others are kind of neutral? So yeah, I've got a connection with all my birds. Just bear with me. I can only film so much in a week because I'm pretty flat out at the minute, and I hope to introduce you to most of the birds. Each relationship I have with each bird is very unique. There will be different factors and ways that I handle the birds and I deal with them and I fly them, and you know, I've trained, for example, probably over a dozen Harris hawks for myself and for other people, and no two of those birds have been the same in personality. You know, some of them have been much more pleasant to work with, some of them are naturally much more grumpy, some learn quickly, some learn slowly. So each one is unique, and therefore the bond and the relationship you build with that bird is unique. You know, they're all amazing to work with. However, you know, some of them really do stand out, and there's a couple of birds that through my career, they've always been extra special, and that's because there may be just a special part to your bond that doesn't exist so much with the others, or just the way they fly and the things you see them do is just incredible, and those birds will just stand out so much more than others. And it doesn't mean that the others are any less good, but there's always certain birds that stick with you. Do all your birds need toys or items for mental stimulation, or is your working with them considered enough? So yeah, enrichment's a really interesting thing, and with enrichment, people are more aware of enrichment than you think. You say the word enrichment, people go, what's enrichment? But if you go to a zoo, for example, you'll see feeders and tubes stuffed with food and foraging materials. You'll see sometimes toys, so balls or cardboard boxes to rip up, different things. You might see that you put two certain species near each other because they might naturally smell each other in the wild. That's a form of enrichment. So enrichment takes part in a lot of animal care of all species. You know, you enrich your dog by giving him toys to play with. That's enrichment in his day. So yes, they all need enrichment. However, what sort of enrichment they need can vary quite a lot. So for example, the raven, just go back to her because she's quite unique, she loves toys. So physical toddler toys, she absolutely loves stuff like that because she's got a really active brain. She's got a real sense of curiosity. The caracaras are the same, and my eagle as well. However, the hawks and the falcons, they're usually not so interested in like having a ball to play with or a toy. However, enrichment for them is, you know, a good view, so they can actually see things moving around. If they were just staring at a blank wall, that's not a very enriching view. They like to eat whole carcasses. You know, that's also enrichment. So, you know, for me to give a whole quail to a hawk, they've got to rip through the feathers and the bone to get all the meat. It takes time to eat. If I just give them a soft piece of meat, they'll swallow it in a couple of gulps and it's gone. So the types of enrichment that we do are all very different, and they are unique to that bird, and I basically just test things out. So when I get that bird, as I'm going through the training process, as they spend time in the aviary, I might put different things in. Some things they'll like, some things they'll ignore, some things they won't like, and we just find a way with each bird for their individual needs. Have you ever had a falcon not come back when you've asked? Do they go on adventures, then knock on the door 3 days later and have to go in time out? So if I look at the span of time that I've been flying birds, I've only had 2 birds in 15 years that have been out overnight. I had a falcon that got lost. He got blown off course in the winds and he spent 3 days out, and it took him a little while to work out where he was and for me to catch up with him. And I had an eagle out overnight who decided he wasn't really in the mood for flying that day. It was at a display, and it was one of the first times he'd worked in that environment. It was something new I was trying with him, and it just didn't work. It wasn't for him. And since then, I've never done anything like that. And he basically decided that the wood block on the edge of the arena looked way better, and he would go and sit up in there. And he basically put his foot up and said, "I'm staying here, thanks." So I stayed with him all day, which is, you know, quite stressful, but you know, you can't really do anything, so there's no point panicking. Realised that he was going to roost there, and then I got back up just before first light, and I was there as soon as the sun came up, and he saw me and he said, "Yeah, I'll come back down, thanks. I've had enough of being out in the wild. It's not for me." In fact, I think he was pretty cross that, like, you know, "Well, where have you been? You've abandoned me in this tree." So their mentality is quite funny, really. But yeah, in all my time, I've only had 2 birds out overnight. I will occasionally have to get my tracking equipment out to find a hunting bird that I've watched it hunt, and especially the falcons because they're so high up. As they come down chasing their prey, I might be at one side of the field, but from where they've come down, they might be a field and a half away. And I've seen roughly where they go down, but it just takes me a little while to sort of get around the edge of the fields and catch up to them. And it's much quicker to get my tracking gear out and work out, yep, they're just over there. I've had a couple of hawks that have seen things like cows, which they've not seen before, and they've decided that they just sort of lose their focus and they become very obsessed with the thing that they're not sure about or they're scared about, and they'll either flit off to a different location to take themselves away from that danger, or they'll just sit and stay still until they've basically processed what it is and then refocus on you. So it does happen, but not very commonly. I've never had a bird, luckily, that's flown off and I've never got back. You know, touch wood. You know, you can't say something will never happen, but if you build that bond in the right way and you fly the bird when you know it's receptive, then you shouldn't really have any issues. However, the environment can change and you can fly in a certain location knowing that that's okay, but then you might one day fly in a location and something different happens. Somebody appears out of a bush that you didn't expect, a dog walker or something, spooks the bird, and they might flit off for a bit. But normally you can catch up with them quite quickly, and you know, they want to be back with you because you're the anchor in their whole world. You know, they're the thing that you're the thing that they know is safe. So if you've built that relationship correctly, they should want to come back. Have you ever been attacked or bitten by one of the birds, and if so, how did you handle it? Yeah, so it does happen. You can't really see, my hands are pretty horrid. You get small little scrapes and scratches. At the end of the day, I'm working with animals that have knives on the end of their feet, and even in the process of basic handling and husbandry, you know, they can catch me. I know I've got skin, it's not really great for anything sharp. However, working with malicious birds is not really a thing. You very rarely get a bird that is actively aggressive. You would have to do something pretty mental to upset a bird. If you know how to correctly handle that bird and work with that bird, then there should be no reason for them to attack you. Most of the time, if you do get grabbed by a bird, and that's the most common thing, is for them to use their feet, because remember, their beak is actually their eating tool. And I've worked with very few birds that actually actively try to bite you. Things like vultures and caracaras, they can be more bitey because they use their beak to manipulate the world around them. However, for hawks, falcons, owls, they tend to bite less. If they're cross, they will use their weapon, and that's their feet. It's normally a squeeze, but the difference between their feet and our hands is that when we grip onto something, the lactic acid builds up, the muscles get tired. With their feet, they work like ratchets, and they can lock their feet in place with no effort. On eagles, if you lift a large eagle's foot up and down, you can actually sometimes hear the clicking as their feet sort of lock, which is quite amazing. So most of the time, if I get grabbed by a bird, I would pretty much 99.9% of the time know that it was my fault. And the only time really when injuries happen is when we have to catch up the birds to do something. It might be some veterinary treatment, it might be to check, say, something that we can't do with them sat on the glove. I try to do as much with them sat on a perch or sat on my glove. So for instance, I can change their equipment that they wear around their legs with them just sat on the perch, and they just stand there, and I can cut off the old equipment, put new equipment on, and they tend to not mind that. You get the odd bird that's more awkward, that is a bit more fidgety, and so it's much quicker to catch them up in a towel, basically, make them like a little burrito in a towel, hold them so they're nice and safe and secure, and then you can quickly change their equipment. We also have to sometimes reshape their beaks, because their beaks are made of keratin, just like our nails, and they grow and they can overgrow, especially if they eat a lot of soft food. So again, it's easier sometimes to what we call cast them, so to catch them up, and then we can do that job very quickly, and they can be back up on the glove within a couple of minutes, and it's a minimum stress factor then. You know, you don't want to hold a bird for any longer than you need to. So in those moments, if I slightly mess up the process of me handling that bird and holding that bird in place, I get my finger in the way, their automatic reaction in the moment that they don't like is to grab out, and they might not be able to see what they're grabbing at, and they'll grab me in the hand or the arm, and that's when it's going to hurt. I sort of try to relate it to, if you imagine standing on a plug and then just not getting off it, while you get grabbed, it's a very intense feeling. It's not nice. However, the second they let go, it's that big sigh of relief. But I would never say they tend to really do anything on purpose. You know, as a falconer, you've provoked them by doing something that they don't like. So you need to assess the actions that you take and the way in which you handle them, so that A, you're safe, and B, they're safe. But if something happens and you get grabbed, the other thing where I've had it is where I've gone to feed a bird. So the bird's been sat on my glove, and I'm just not really paying attention, and I flick the food up into my hand, a bit slow, and the bird reaches out to grab for the food, because they use their feet like hands, so they go, oh, thank you very much, and they've also grabbed my hand as part of the food. So I had to sit for 20 minutes one day with a buzzard sat on my hand, and my other hand next to my glove with the food, while the buzzard ate all the food, and then realised, and he literally looked down and sort of went, oh, that's not food, let go of my hand, and I could sort of take my hand away. That was very, very painful. It was totally my fault. And I couldn't ring anyone because my hands were basically handcuffed together, you know, because I can't phone someone and say, can you help? And I was sat on my own just feeding this bird. It was just literally, he was in his early part of his training, so he just got all his confidence up, basically. It would have been mental of me to pull my hand away. If I start wriggling my hand, the automatic reaction for the bird is that, well, I'm holding on to my prey, and if it moves, it's not dead yet, so I'm going to hold on. So the best thing you can do is nothing. Just be calm. If there's someone else with you, they can help lift the toes back so that you can free your hand. If you're on your own, you literally just have to sit there and wait until they're ready to let go. Why do some falconers use what I think look like goggles or maybe side blinders on their bird's eyes? So The funny little hats that you sometimes see us put on the falcons are called hoods, and you might have heard of the term to hoodwink someone, which usually means to trick someone. So hooding is basically a tool we have to be able to take a bird out of a situation that we know they might not like. So in initial training, the falcon remains hooded for periods, and then as the bird gets used to us, we unhood him for a bit of training. So that initial training period is when the bird is sat on the glove, learning to eat from us. So we'll unhood him for that period. He has to deal with learning about what the falconer is, learning how to eat. And at the end of the session, we pop his hood back on and he can relax. Because when birds can't see, it's basically night time. If it goes dark, it's night, and night is rest time. And remember, birds of prey are mostly focused on visual stimulus. Their sight's their top sort of sense that they use. So if you take away what they can see, it allows them to calm down. So the hood is a tool really, and it comes in for a lot of uses. Initial training, it's a great help because we can take the birds away from a scary situation, which initially is us while they're learning what we are, and then becomes other things. So I might be walking out with my hawk, I might take him up the road into the fields just so that he can get used to riding along on my hand, which is the first part before we start flying them. And then in the distance I can see a tractor steaming towards us, and I think, oh no, he's never seen a tractor before. Now I've got two options. I can carry on unhooded, and he'll see the tractor and he's going to have a bad experience, and he's going to relate then walking up that track to seeing a scary tractor and being scared. Or I can pop his hood on if I've hood trained him, and then basically we can go with the tractor coming past us. He'll hear the tractor, he might be a bit jumpy and think, oh, what's that noise? But he's not going to panic because he can't see it. And so we can go past the tractor, I can take his hood off, and he can go, oh yeah, we're still here in the field, there's nothing scary. And I can carry on positively with that training session and end on a positive. Equally, I might have to go to the vet. It's going to be a scary journey in a car or in a travel box of some kind. We're going to have to go into an alien environment. They're going to see a vet, they're going to see a big bright lit room. But if I can hood the bird, again, I've taken all that stress away because the bird doesn't have to see what's going on. So any stressful situation then is minimised. So the hood is a tool, and if it's used well, it can be an excellent addition to a falcon or a hawk. We don't hood owls, there's no way to hood owls, so if you're wondering that, it's things we use with eagles, hawks, falcons, really. We can also use it when we're hunting because the bird's going to get really excited. Now, I might need to walk quietly or get to a certain position to be able to let the bird go in the best spot. What I don't want the bird to do is to get all excited, flap around, jump around, ring his bell, and then for him to spook the prey before he's had a chance to get up and flying and into position. So I can keep that bird hooded until it's his time to fly, and I can unhood him and he'll know it's time to go. And they get really used to routine, it's what they like. So the bird starts off, they know that when I pick them up, I'll pop the hood on, I'll walk him to the scales and weigh him, and he knows that he's going to be weighed because he goes through the process of stepping on the scales. He then goes in his travel box, we drive up to the location where I'm going to hunt with him, and he knows that as soon as that hood comes off, he can fly. So you find that when you pick them up, they're like, yep, please hood me, because it's the first stage of that process to him getting his flight. And then afterwards, when he's had his fill, he's caught his prey, he's filled himself up with food, he's got a crop full, he's pretty much ready for a rest. You know, he's seen everything he needs to see, he wants to chill out. I can pop his hood on and he can just sit there and relax because he doesn't need to see and be stimulated by everything. He's basically in a food coma, and he can sit and digest his food in peace. Even when I travel birds in travel boxes, and if you don't know what a travel box is, watch the travel box video. When you put them back in their box, I've opened the box door when I've got home and they've either got their foot up or they're fast asleep because they've had their fly, they've had a bit of fun, and they're just ready to chill. From the time you started, how long was it until you felt you had it all under control? I sometimes still don't I feel have it under control. You know, you're dealing with individual animals that have their own brains, that make their own set of mistakes and crazy decisions sometimes, and you know, we have to mop up their terrible decisions. However, I think certainly for the first sort of 3 years, maybe 2 or 3 years, I was fairly blind really in what I was doing. You know, I had support, I had a mentor, and I was learning as I went, and and when you're working with your own birds, you know, you are really learning on the job because they're all unique. However, it just takes time to sort of understand why things are happening, because until you work with a few different birds, you can't relate certain things that happen or work out why. Whereas now I can look at a situation and go, well, that's obviously because of that. But for the first few years, you know, it felt a little bit like I was muddling my way through, and I think that's the case, you know, for lots of different things in life. But with time, you know, it builds up, and then you get to a point where you think, I am more in control. However, you know, you don't stop learning, and if I thought I knew it all, I might as well give up, because I still have friends that I consider mentors for me, that are there to help me and guide me. Breeding birds of prey is a new thing for me. It's only something I've been dabbling in for a few years, and I have very novice questions that I have to turn to my friends and say, what should I do in this scenario? How can I handle this? What can I do with this thing? And if I didn't have those friends and that support network, you know, I would really struggle. So, you know, you never really stop learning. And when you work with a new species that you've not worked with before, there's a whole set of new questions. What's normal for that species, and how can you get them to fly in a certain way? How can you encourage certain behaviours out of them? You know, if I want a bird to soar, I've got to think of a way that I can reward it for getting and gaining height, but I can't get up in the sky and fly around and show them how to do it. So, you know, sometimes you have to problem solve in quite a strange way to sort of encourage those birds up. It might mean I have to go and walk up the side of a hill every day and fly the bird off the top of the hill to help it find the lift. So you have to think outside the box. But have I stopped learning? No way. Will I ever stop learning? Don't think so. But I do feel more now I've got it in control, certainly with the basics. But if there's one thing falconry's taught me, is that it always throws up something new that you didn't expect before. Have you ever cared or rehabilitated an injured bird of prey? Also, do you work for or with rescue and conservation societies? So yeah, you know, we do deal with wild rehabs. I don't tend to too much, because I prefer those birds to go to facilities that do it all the time. However, if I get a call, and it happens quite a lot, you know, people know you're a falconer, or they know you're the local falconer, you'll get a call out to an injured bird that's been found, and I will literally just drop everything. I will, as long as everything's safe where I am, you know, that's my day on hold, and I will go out and deal with that bird. If it's physically injured, it will go to the vet first, and then I'll deal with whatever medicating it needs. But yeah, it does happen. Sometimes I can get them onto the right person to rehab, but sometimes you have to get involved, and it's all part of falconry. You know, we are mad for these birds, and there's no way that I'm going to sit here with my birds and not go and help a wild one. So yeah, it's totally important. I talked a bit about it in the last video, but again, conservation is a massive part that we play, and you know, we try to get involved in supporting projects. You know, within the falconry community, even if it's just fundraising, you know, we do a lot to try and help spread the word about certain charities, to educate through our birds that we fly with members of the public, and then where required, you know, we will get involved with conservation. Certainly in the UK, goshawks, peregrines, buzzards, kites have all been helped by falconers. I hope you enjoyed watching that. In the next video, I'm going to be talking about all your questions to do with hunting with birds of prey. So we've gone through a little bit about what falconry is, what it's like to work with birds of prey, and then in the next episode it's going to be about how to hunt, why we hunt, and what the purpose of it is. So I really hope you'll join me again soon. But for now, thank you very much. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. You'll get notifications about the latest videos, and I'll see you all soon. Bye.